think this morning we're going to get into some quite practical stuff, but just a quick word on the way into our first session, if I may. Embrace the Middle East, the charity I work for, our current 5-year strategy is called Hope in Action, which I'm rather pleased about. I was pleased about anyway, but I'm very pleased about, because I think that's essentially what it's a translation of hope. It's a word with its sleeves rolled up, hope in action. Many, many years ago, when I was at university, there'll be plenty of people in this room who will know the name John Sobrino, Jesuit liberation theologian. And John Sobrino came to town, and I was incredibly excited. And he was giving a lecture at the Catholic chaplaincy, and I went along to the lecture, and I was incredibly excited. And I came away, I was still incredibly excited, but I couldn't remember anything that he'd said, except for one thing, which I still remember. Thank you. The people must have a project. And that struck me as incredibly profound, for reasons I didn't understand, and I still don't entirely understand, trying to learn. But I think he was talking about faith in hope, well, faith and hope in action. And I don't need to tell you how the liberation theology was about reflecting on the real world and real life in the light of the gospel, and turning orthodoxies into orthopraxis. And what we're going to hear now, I think, is from 4 of our members and member organizations, is what it means for hope to be a verb and not just a noun, and how if our hope is born of our faith, and it certainly is, how it is nourished by what we do. So, we're going to hear in the following order from Aisling Griffin from Pax Christi, from Farr, also Pax Christi, but talking about two quite different things. Martin Birdseye, who will talk to us about nuclear weapons from CCND, and John Paul de Quay, who will talk to us about and introduce us into the following session, which is a very practical session, or actually the next set of 2 sessions, which will focus on climate justice, creation, and the environment. So we'll start with Aisling. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Aisling, and it's really wonderful to have been here with you this weekend. But my role is with Pax Christi, and I'm the school and youth education worker. I can see somebody heading this way, so I'm going to do that, and I got a thumbs up, so that's a good sign. So my role really includes working with children, with young people, and with teachers to promote kind of peace education and that message of peace in schools, universities, youth groups, etc. And it's a privilege really to be able to do that work, to see signs, I think, of hope in the kind of work that I'm doing and in the people that I meet, and to be part of people's journey in working towards a more just society. I often talk to students about people that they see putting justice into action, and you get all kinds of answers. I sometimes get family members, I get talk about teachers, sometimes it might be celebrities, and sometimes even politicians. But I remember very clearly there was one session where I like to move on and not talk about what other people are doing, but what they can do. And I had one very strident voice come from the back of the room one day saying, "Vote Boris Johnson out." Unsurprisingly, maybe, there was a massive round of applause spontaneously. And I think it's very easy to make kind of generalisations about young people and children, but I do think it's fair to say that young people are very aware of what is happening in our society and in our world. And my overall impression is that social justice, peace, equality, fairness are really important for the young people that I work with. And I was at a launch report a few weeks ago, and one of the speakers had been talking to a teacher that she works with, and the kind of anecdotal evidence that she got was that teachers are finding young people are more interested in social justice than they ever have been before. The teacher was saying that that interest has just skyrocketed over the past few years. So I was working, I'm going to do that, there we go. I was working 2 weeks ago in a primary and then a secondary school, and we were talking about how we build peace, kind of practical examples of things we could do. And there was some real insights into what peacemaking could look like. Some real original, coherent ideas, as well as a recognition of the importance of activism, doing something active, putting faith into action. And I also often do workshops on conflict and violence. And if we know what peace is, we need to look at what might be the root causes of violence and conflict to work towards peace. And young people were identifying a huge range of forms of conflict that they face in their everyday life. Everything from things on a personal level, in their communities, globally, as well as those ideas that Father Patrick were talking about yesterday, about those manifest violence, but also structural violence. So things that were coming up were things like racial injustice and kind of the importance of Black Lives Matter, climate change, a lack of support for mental health, homophobia, war, kind of violence and knife crime, poverty, homelessness. The list goes on as to all the kinds of things that young people are identifying as kind of injustices and these impediments to peace, if you like. And these are things that young people are seeing in their life, kind of on a personal level and in the media. However, there's also a sense of sometimes engaging with injustice. So being very eager to call out those double standards that we might see, unfairness, a lack of coherence in what people are saying and what people are doing, and also sometimes a lack of agency that young people might find they have when they're trying to change in some way, or where they see an injustice but there's something maybe blocking them in the structures that they're involved in. And I'm also challenged very much by the young people. Who do I think I am getting up there talking about peace? So there's ideas like, do I think peace is possible? How? But also, why am I not working in this country? Why am I not talking about that conflict? At which point I'm a little bit like, ask your teacher, they're the ones who booked me, kind of thing. And there's a real sense of not just wanting to talk. I'm not just there to talk, I need to be there giving practical reasons and kind of giving them things that they want to get involved in as well. And if I'm honest, I don't actually remember being that engaged when I was young. And so I do think it's really encouraging for me and inspiring for me to see people already engaged in that kind of thing. And I also like what I call the hang on a minute questions, where you sometimes introduce a topic that people might not know so much about, and you get this kind of light bulb moment of putting the new knowledge they have and the values together to kind of ask those questions that are much more critically analytical than I think you sometimes might just get on a kind of just general talk, a real engagement in wanting to be critiquing what we're seeing. And I really think for me, this idea of wanting to be an active citizen, a critical citizen, a citizen who cares, is something that is really hopeful for the future in a society that we might want to build. But I'm also really fortunate to work with networks where I can see young people taking active roles in working for social justice. I think before I do that though, it's maybe fair to point out that we have organisations such as that here with us this weekend. So we've had Student Christian Movement. I know there's a couple of people involved in the Young Christian Climate Network. I think the Ecological Conversion Group, it's fair to say as well, would fit into that. So it's not just kind of vague, we have people here as well who are doing that work. I think also I'm very happy to be a member of Religions for Peace, the Interfaith Youth Network, where we see people working and their faith kind of calling them to work, not just on in kind of the Catholic community, but in many other communities as well. We work with youth-led organisations such as Demilitarised Education to get weapons out of universities. We're in contact with Teach the Future, our youth-led campaign for climate education in the UK. And we also see young people getting involved in kind of protests and activism with Extinction Rebellion, even groups with CAFOD. And often this work can be intergenerational. So this support and learning is something that I think brings hope for all of us sharing our dreams, our experience and our work. And a few weeks ago, Million Minutes had their Celebrating Young People Awards, and I was privileged to be on one of these panels. And these awards celebrate young people from across the country who put Catholic social teaching into action, and they're nominated by their teachers, their youth workers, their chaplains. And I've had the opportunity also to work with some of the alumni of those awards. And many of them are still active in working for social justice, working for peace on a wide range of issues. And I think they really are, not just the future, but the present of the church as well. And a bit of a shout out as well to Sue from Lancaster Diocese, who invited me up to work up there along with Terry. And there's some really inspiring work with youth groups, especially impact youth groups, working in their communities, but also to empower each other. So there was a young women's empowerment project that's really inspiring, I think, to see young people wanting to inspire each other, to work with each other, to put their faith into action with each other. And I could give so many more examples, but I'll stop because I think I'll just be giving list upon list upon list. But I think it's abundantly clear that young people are involved in social action, leading social action, inspiring social action, campaigning with each other, for each other, doing really innovative and striking campaigns. And I think that's hope for the future again, but also very much hope in the present that work is happening, that engagement is there. And yesterday I was in a workshop, and I apologise for not quite getting the name of the person, but somebody mentioned this idea of needing to embrace warm-heartedness. And one of the hopeful signs for me is also the compassion that I can really see with the young people that I work with. So many of you will know James Truby from Columban's Justice and Peace Education. So we were working together a few years ago at a Faith in Action Day in a school, and we had one of our guests, one of the visitors, was a refugee who was about to be able to finally reunite with one of their family members. And the joy that the young people had in hearing that message, just that human connection that they were able to make and share, was just a really lovely example of the joy and the care that I think young people do have, when they come into encounter with others. And I think more recently we can also see the massive kind of outpouring of support for what's happening in Ukraine and students really wanting to respond. And some really kind of unique examples of people doing everything from vigils, and it might be fundraising, but generally wanting to do something there. So I feel like I've missed a bit, yes I have. So I think it's important to mention the importance of teachers, of chaplains, youth workers, educators in the work that I do. I couldn't do the work that I do without them. And my overwhelming feeling is that there are educators, teachers, youth workers out there that really want the young people they work with to be involved and active in exploring social justice, what peace means, what justice means. And they really recognise the value in this and kind of promote that work in what they're doing. So I think the good educators that we can see wanting the best for their young people and who are encouraging them to be active is hope as well, a kind of very active kind of form of wanting to pass that message on and creating a more caring society. So what action can you take? It's kind of not used just me standing up here chatting about anecdotes, kind of, what is the practice in this? I think firstly, let's recognise it and let's celebrate it. It's very easy to kind of just get a bit bogged down in what we see not happening. And it's also important that whatever age we are, we do support each other. And that's a kind of a key thing in our work. Share news stories, kind of share the work that's happening, talk to people about it. And when you hear a good thing, share it with others. It might even be if you're on social media, kind of those shares are always useful to kind of get networks going. Nominate young people for the Million Minutes Award when it comes up next, to share those news stories, to highlight what's happening. And it might be just in your parish, if you see something happening, put up a sign, spread the word, kind of promote something, offer support, and listen to the young people that you're coming into contact with, and where they're at. It's very easy to project, but kind of, really listen, I think, to where young people are at and what they want to say. Because networking is always really important, it's always really useful, but I think sometimes a slightly no pressure approach, where we're not kind of forced into doing a piece of work, but actually looking to see where those signs of hope can grow and those networks can grow in a way that will bear fruit. We're not in competition with one another, we're all working to the same goals. And you might actually want to point young people in the direction of the Christian Peace Education Fund. I have some leaflets that I can hand out later, and they support young people in giving grants for peace education. And often the access to funding, to gatekeepers, can be something that is really important. So if you do know young people, or you might vaguely know that somebody might want some grants, come to me later and I'll happily give you some information and leaflets there. So just to end, I want to reiterate that the hope that I get from working with young people and educators is a real inspiration to me, and I hope just some of those stories will give you hope that there is kind of an active sense of engagement with social justice and the desire for social justice and for a more caring and just world that our young people are very much active and engaged in. So I'm going to leave it there, and hopefully I didn't go too much over time. Thank you.
Well, good morning everybody, and thank you very much to Aisling for all that that you've presented in such an encouraging way, and challenging us to do something as well. I have worked I've worked with Palestinians and with Israelis in Palestine as an ecumenical accompanier, and I also work on the Pax Christi International Working Group in solidarity with people in Palestine. When I first went to Palestine, everybody talked to me about the occupation, and they also always mentioned hope. Despite the awfulness of all they told us, and all that they showed us of colonisation, of occupation, oppression, and the daily injustices and violations of international law, they talked about having hope. I actually wondered where they found that hope, because every day everything seemed stacked up against them. But in listening and in more visits and learning more, it was quite clear that their hope was being expressed as part of their faith, whether Christian or Muslim. Over many years of visiting and being with people and listening more, I noticed that there were far fewer mentions of hope, and I felt in the communities a growing and communal depression. As violence against Palestinians increased, any notion of peace talks being real disappeared, and the silence of the international community was and is deafening. When I'm asked about Palestine today, I can say that the planned theft of land, the violence, the demolition of homes, and the targeting, torture and imprisonment of children and young people is worse every day. And still, the international community says little and does nothing to call Israel to account. When I was asked to do this presentation, I agreed, because we promised that we would tell the stories of the people that we met. But I actually thought that finding much to say was going to be very difficult. PowerPoint's gone back to Aisling. Aisling donated me some of her time because she said she wouldn't take up so much time, so she donated it to me. We do that, we share a lot in Pax Christi. When I went to start doing this, and I said I thought I would find it difficult to say anything, I thought, well, it's not for, I know where I see the hope, but I asked Palestinian friends in Palestine where they found hope. And now what's difficult is not being able to show you all the photos and all the things that they told me. The olive tree. widely known as a symbol of peace. It's also a powerful symbol of Palestinian rootedness in the land. And here you see the planting of olive trees, some ancient olive trees in the village where I worked, and the tending of them, and then the shared picnics that people have. Mohammed said, "When armed gangs invaded the Palestinian villages in 1948, my grandparents decided to leave, but my great-grandfather refused to be parted from his olive trees. Our conflict is about the land, and the trees and the olive oil are powerful tools that we use to share our story. It's a form of non-violent resistance." Since the Israeli occupation of the West Bank in 1967, Palestinian farmers have lost hundreds and thousands of trees. Trees planted and cared for by generations of the same family have been destroyed and uprooted as Israeli settlers seek to claim Palestinian land as their own. Despite the uprooting, cutting down and burning of olive trees by those settlers, Palestinians continue to plant and nurture new seedlings and to plant new trees. In solidarity, internationals buy olive trees to donate, and some go out, as I know Jeff does and many others here, go out to accompany the families in the planting and the harvesting, and share in those family lunches and the generous hospitality that everybody offers. There is huge hope in that. Despite the loss and possibility of even further destruction, the trees are planted and cared for. Living for thousands of years, and with the capacity to regenerate, the olive tree is often used to describe the Palestinian concept of sumud, deep, deep rootedness, existing despite everything. Steadfastness is a word that they often use. To exist is to resist. We will stay. The wall, the military towers, the fences, the barbed wire, the checkpoints, all over the West Bank that we see as we travel, and yet still you see hope. In Palestine, I see hope in the people, in the families and in the communities that I visit, and in this community like L'Arche in Bethlehem, where you can see that people feel cared for and are treated with respect. And of course many of you will recognise the felted goods that we have on stalls, and you may bring them out at Christmas, and please remember the community when you do that. Every Palestinian town has refugee camps from 1948. In Bethlehem there are 3, and this is Ida Camp. In all of them, there are community projects that provide opportunities for meeting together, for education, for sport and drama, and for so much more. And here, on the wall, at the entrance to Ida Camp, something inside so strong. And that really is true of the Palestinian people. The key, the hope of returning to their homes that they were turned out of with great violence in 1948. The decorating of the little simple classrooms that they have for the little ones, the greening of their area in this crowded refugee camp, the teaching of music and art. Just checking. Zubi from Wiam, who some of you will know, said, "I see hope in the future generation who have the opportunity to do new things. We need to help our children to stay here. Those who work with youth give me hope. I too see hope in the schools, in the commitment that families have to ensure the education of their children, girls and boys. And the teachers, unlike many of us here, often have to physically protect their students from the appalling violence of the Israeli military, and will do anything that they can, including putting their own lives in danger to do that." Yesterday we heard the story of the Good Samaritan, and we talked about the road from Jerusalem to Jericho. Along either side of that road live small communities of the Jahalin Bedouin, and these are some of them here, living in shacks, living without water, without electricity, without amenities. And they're in the shadow of Maladumin, one of the biggest settlers, illegal Israeli settlers in the West Bank, who have all the amenities that they need. The Comboni sisters, who I think are wonderful, have been supporting these communities for many years, and they have ensured that some of these little communities, about 9 of them, have kindergartens. They're very simple, but there is amazing joy, both in the kindergartens with the children, but also in their families, who are encouraged to take part, and the women are being trained to be teachers of those kindergartens. And again, as you go around, you see hope. Youth of Samud are young Palestinians who live just south of Hebron, just on the outskirts of it, one of the most violent places in the West Bank. They constantly challenge the occupation, and they work alongside families whose homes are being demolished, which is a daily happening in the West Bank, and certainly where they live. Their home is constantly raided by the Israeli military. They're beaten up, they're imprisoned, they're detained and treated incredibly badly. But they continue to do that work. They challenge the soldiers. They stand alongside the people and try to prevent the demolition of the homes. They are there providing that hope and security and solidarity that people need. And two Pax Christi partners and friends in Bethlehem of many are the Sumud Story House of the Arab Education Institute and WIAM, the Conflict Transformation Centre. And they work with, they're very near the checkpoint in Bethlehem. They see violence every day, they often are tear gassed, as are the people who visit, and they stand as something very special near that checkpoint. They work with Christians and Muslims, with children, with young people and family groups to share stories, to eat together, to form a choir, to plant gardens with fruit trees and beautiful flowers. They're trying to offer small employment opportunities with the embroidery and the olive wood and catering, and both offer hospitality to anybody who goes past. You can go in for a cup of tea. And Rania from the Sumud Story House said, "We create spaces of encouragement." We create spaces of encouragement, development and conversations that accompany people in their growth. Local craftsmen and women, farmers and brewers, nobody can go to the West Bank and not have Taipei beer and Cremisan wine. It's absolutely essential that you support the economy. Unfortunately, you can't, they have difficulty in importing it, but we can buy the Palestinian produce from Zaytun, all the food goods that are so delicious. And of course we can support the craftspeople who make the wonderful olive wood things that so many of us have in our homes. The wall. The wall is 30 foot high, it's ugly, it imprisons things and it prevents people from going to their homes, to health, to education and to visit families or even to attend funerals. But it is transformed everywhere you go. It's covered in graffiti. I love the graffiti on the wall. There's so much there. There are statements, there's challenges, there are quotes from scripture, there are pictures, as you see here, and they record the names of the people who have died, and you see there Shireen Abu Akleh, who was killed a few weeks ago, who is actually the cousin of one of our friends in one of the centres. And then that picture of looking to see if you can see the hope that you will see through the wall, that wonderful picture of looking through to Jerusalem, which of course they can't see from inside Bethlehem near the wall, and of course the hope that the wall will fall. Rania said, reviving our Sumud is done through our heritage, our music, our art, and working in unity with love and faith. There are joint communities of Israelis and Palestinians in Israel because you can't do that in the West Bank. And the hand-in-hand schools and the Wahat Salam and Never Shalom work together. Oh So the two communities that work together, learning together, being educated together, listening to each other, make a huge difference, both within the schools, and they share each other's feast days, a real sign of hope there. And then the Jewish-Israeli, the Jewish-Israeli solidarity. Israeli-Palestinian, confused me. Women in Black, Breaking the Silence, the Israeli Refuser Network and Rabbis for Human Rights, ICAD and so many others. Israelis, Jewish people who work against the occupation, who stand out. And Nora Karmi has said, hope is in those in Israel who refuse to serve in the army and stand in solidarity, demanding equal rights for all. Solidarity is important. Yet the young refuseniks who refuse to go in the army deserve our support and help, because it's a very brave thing at 18 to say you won't go into the Israeli military. And that's one of the young women who has done that and been imprisoned for refusing to join the military. There are those religious communities who are in solidarity too. They are there alongside people, providing oases of quiet, but also being there and working with others. Accompaniment too, I think, is a very important part of peacemaking, and it does give hope, because we're told that. As ecumenical accompaniers from around the world, people serve in different communities under threat. They're there to tell the stories, to watch, to record, and to provide the evidence that is needed. And then the Palestinians who have joined the community peacemakers, they used to be called the Christian peacemakers, but when internationals couldn't go, the young Palestinians joined in the work of taking children to school and of being there alongside them, which is really good to see the young Palestinians being able to do that, because of course they're threatened more by the Israeli military than we would be as internationals. And of course our presence and prayer is really important. That moment when Pope Francis made an unscheduled stop and stopped to pray against that ugly war where the Israeli military are very often throwing tear gas was so important, and is recorded all the time. Every Friday, a group of people, whether small or large, prays at the wall in Bethlehem, at that icon of Mary who is weeping on the wall, walking from the military tower down to the icon saying the rosary, and when we're there we join them. And we have from Pax Christi has invited everybody to join on Friday night as the sun goes down to pray for peace. And we gather with all those who work and pray for a just peace in Palestine and Israel. And of course going and seeing is important, but going and seeing and being with the people, not just to do what I call a holy tour, and I hope people will forgive me for saying that, but it's about going to hear and see the living stones, and to listen to their stories and then to tell those stories. And this wonderful anemone, the Palestinian anemone, is one that pops up all over the place, in demolitions, when you in the middle of the rubble of people's homes, by the checkpoints and everywhere else. This wonderful sign of hope and of new life pops up. A sunset over the desert and the Dead Sea. And Zubi said, hope is like the sunrise. No power on earth can ignore the sunrise of hope. And of course, our hope is in the children. It's in and for the future, which is the children. And I want to quote from a journalist and activist who lives in Masafa Yatta, which is under threat of demolition all the time at the moment, because they want to cleanse the whole area of the people who live there. Decades of asking for justice from the occupier really exhausted us. It proved to be useless. Decades of showing that this is my only home, that I have no other place to go, that you are committing a war crime against us. Our only hope now is for the international community to pressure the Israeli government and Israeli Ministry of Defence, and I would add, and our government too. And he says, I draw power from the different people all around the world who support our struggle. I have met and talked to hundreds of people, and it gives me hope. that people are taking actions in order to stop the evacuation of my home, Massa Valletta. So for sure this gives me hope and gives me power. So we have seen and we have heard, and we act in solidarity and struggle, and by we I mean all of us. We want to change the systems that cause the injustice, and we use all those signs of hope to do it. In this case, the justice is the occupation, and we must work to end the occupation. And Usama said, hope is the power to believe that the justice, peace, freedom, and ending the occupation is possible. And the last word goes to Murakami, who says, I believe that hope is human beings finally understanding and doing the will of God to preserve the dignity of everyone. Together we can make it, and I believe we can, and we have to hang on to that. In a few weeks' time, in September actually, it's going to be the World Week for Peace in Palestine and Israel, and can I ask you to take cards as you go out of the hall? The beautiful one with the anemone on has a lovely prayer and by Jan Such-Bickard, and to use that with your communities. And the new prayer has an affirmation on it, which is about change coming, and that's what we have to believe. If we have hope, we have to believe that change is possible. And the other one, blooms, not bombs, reminding of that refugee camp. The Three Counties Agricultural Show has an weapons, arms fair. And we would ask you to take one of these and to send it to stop it, that we can have flowers instead of bombs. Thank you very much.
You know, this week I've just finished reading a 300-year-old storybook. It's Robinson Crusoe by Daniel Defoe. It's not an allegorical tale like the other famous books of the time, and it's startlingly realistic. But like a great deal of fiction of any time, it is unconsciously revealing of the social norms, the values of the time. And one thing that struck me in the book is the attitude to slavery. If you haven't read the original, you won't know that when he was cast away on his desert island, Robinson Crusoe was in charge of a slaving expedition. His fellow plantation owners in Brazil have sent him to West Africa to get more slaves because they're short of labour for their sugar plantations. In the book, on his lonely island, he does reflect on his Christian values, but not really about slavery. Slavery is okay. It's hard to imagine a book like that, with such an inconsistency of values, being published anywhere nowadays. I promise you this is relevant. I'll come back to it in a moment. I am here for the Christian campaign for nuclear disarmament. In many years of working to end nuclear weapons, one incident stands out. A seemingly wise person in a seemingly wise meeting said, "Look, nuclear weapons exist." I think she meant face up to it. We have to live with them. And I realised that the core of my problem as a disarmament campaigner was the pervasive idea that nuclear weapons had to exist, that we were stuck with them forever, that they cannot be uninvented. That's a silly word, really. It's nonsense. It's a nonsense that stems from a popular misunderstanding of science and technology. It actually takes a vast amount of engineering to make a nuclear weapon. For many years, humanity knew of the possibility, and then in the stress of World War II, a truly vast project resulted in the first nuclear weapons. You know the rest of the story. The vast project continues at a vast cost. But it does not have to. We can decide not to do it. It's interesting that official backing for nuclear power has always been partly dependent on the need for materials and also for expertise to enable us to make nuclear weapons. Otherwise, we struggle to maintain the technology. Where is the expertise for something people don't want to do? Where is the money for something that is militarily useless? Yes, we can decide not to do it. Nuclear disarmament can be done. And of course, it must be done. Hiroshima seemed to end World War II, but the consequences are still very much with us. Having got used to obliterating cities overnight, we dealt with one in a few seconds and another the same way 3 days later. And then peace? No. The terrible logic of deterrence soon led to mutually assured destruction and a continuous escalation of destructive power. Kilotons became megatons, and the two bombs begat thousands. That was effectively a million-fold increase in less than 40 years. Some people now rejoice that with common sense and the need to dismantle a dangerous rusting stockpile, we're now down to only a few thousand, equivalent to maybe only 40,000 Hiroshimas. Alongside climate change, nuclear weapons are the other existential threat to humanity, just as serious and possibly more urgent, but actually easier to solve. The catastrophe of nuclear war, like any event with a finite possibility, must happen sometime, unless nuclear weapons are abolished. And that's really helpful. We are sharing our planet with so much destructive power ready to be used that by accident or design, we have come close to nuclear war, on average once every 3 years. And yet, in the nuclear weapon states, we are left with a collective mindset in favour of nuclear weapons. It amounts to a collective, only partly conscious despair. So to do nothing, to go on as we are, is above all a sin against hope. What we desperately need is hope, active hope. Not that we're really short of it. If hope implies perseverance, then we're famous for it. Christian CCND recently had a 60th birthday. We're very proud of it, aren't we? Along with Pax Christi and all the other peace organisations, we've not been idle in all that time. All this work is beginning to bear fruit. In 2017, ICAN, that's the International Coalition of Anti-Nuclear Weapons Groups, was awarded the Nobel Peace Prize for its role in developing the UN Treaty on Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons. We all had a share in earning that prize. It didn't make much publicity in this country. In fact, I learned about it from my nephew from Canada. He sent me a text. He said, "Is this you?" he said. It's about ICAN. Just got the Nobel Peace Prize. That's how I heard about it. The text of the treaty was signed by 122 nations, and so far 66 nations have ratified the treaty. That means they agree it in their parliament and join the treaty, and they become states party to the treaty, and that's brought it into force in international law. By its very nature, it begins to put pressure, moral and practical, on the nuclear weapon states to join the treaty by committing to disarm according to a timetable. As citizens of one of the nuclear weapon states, we have an important role to play, and the treaty gives us a clear framework now to work in. For example, ICANN has appealed to all cities and any other kind of local government to publicly declare support for, and as far as they can, compliance with the treaty. Hundreds of cities, towns and local authorities throughout the world have passed local resolutions in support of the treaty. Manchester was the first to do so in the UK and has since been followed by 24 other local authorities. To see the full list of supportive towns and cities around the world, visit ICANN website. It's called icanw.org. And write to your local councillors to explain the idea. Write as if your town will be proud to be part of it. And they will be. This is big. This is global. This is active hope. You know, one other thing to mention is that it's mostly in the nuclear weapon states that local authorities and cities and so on have been in the lead in this movement, because it's like another centre of decision process where people can say, how can we ensure the health of our local people if they're in danger of destruction in this way? If you look, France, which is one of the most nuclear countries to my mind, there's very many cities there. In the USA, there's places like New York and even the state of California, which is astonishing, really. And in the UK, I think the Welsh National Assembly is on the list, so that's a country, really. So, we will make the world very much safer and free up immense resources for tackling the real problems by abolishing nuclear weapons. Abolition has to be forever, otherwise it's ultimately meaningless. It means no going back, no more nuclear weapons. How can that be achieved? Well, this is our part, the part where we, as Christian people, have a particular contribution to make. Because it will be the moral rejection of nuclear weapons by all of humanity which ensures that we can never collectively go back to them. There is indeed a close analogy with the abolition of slavery. Good Christian people were able to demonstrate that selling and keeping slaves was totally inconsistent with all the other standards that we live by. Now the world can see it. Individuals may fail, but slavery as an institution will never be acceptable. Nuclear weapons are the easiest weapons to detect, and so maybe not so hard to abolish once we agree to get on with it for the right reasons. Their creation and now their abolition could not be done by individuals. It has to be a very big project, a collective undertaking made possible by active hope. Thank you.
Good morning. So I'm John Paul de Quay and I work for the Ecological Conversion Group, which as of January this year has become a charity. And I want to actually thank Martin for pointing out the point about slavery is an excellent segue into this, about because our work is very much about norms, attitudes, and how to change these. So we started off as a group trying, after the Laudato Si, the Pope's encyclical came out, to try and really encourage change in the church on our environmental and our social crises. So two of the key principles of our work, one of them is integral ecology, the reality that everything is interconnected. We can't see any of these things, any of these issues that we see in the world, all the good things in the world, in isolation to one another. So we have society and we have environment. These two things are so deeply interconnected. So this integral ecology is the idea that these networks are themselves interconnected. So that, for example, a flourishing or dysfunctional human society will contribute to a flourishing or dysfunctional biological environment, and vice versa. Our other key principle is ecological conversion. Now this really means it's a commitment inspired by faith to change our lives as to heal the threefold rupture caused by sin with God, with human beings, and with the natural world. So as I say, our work is very much to do with attitudes. So just as a simple diagram, when we put ourselves, our own convenience, our own subjective ethics at the centre of our lives, humanity and our planet become a means to our own convenience. Whereas, this is the idea of being a god. But when we recognise we are creatures as part of God's creation and we put God first, humanity and the world we live in become brothers and sisters and a common home. And this is a really important principle of our work. But today I want to talk to you about our sign of hope, which is our project called Journey to 2030. And it's very much about individual and community action and how that can, will and must change the world. Because we need a healthy society, because the environment, society, all these things are so interlinked. We need a healthy society, not just a healthy environment. So I want to explore how tackling our environmental crisis really has to create and be solved by an entire societal revolution of care. And this is something I find incredibly exciting. The opportunity that stands before us to build a better world. And then I want to reveal some secret weapons that we've been developing in our research and development lab. So just to start, the behavioural change is often dismissed when we're talking about climate change. It's something very, very difficult to do because there's so many barriers to isolation, feeling like you can't make any change on your own. But I'd like to point you towards this report. There's Changing Our Ways, Behaviour Change and the Climate Crisis. It's got some really great stuff in it. So really, when we're tackling the climate crisis, this is not just about the climate crisis. We can't rely simply on politicians and business to make technological innovations that will inevitably cause further problems. We need evidence points towards that we need a change in the way that we operate as a society as well. And the UN defines sustainable lifestyles as a cluster of habits and patterns of behaviour embedded in a society and facilitated by institutions, norms and infrastructures that frame individual choice. And this is really important when we look at how our society works. So this is my diagram, my very inexpert diagram of how I see society working. So we have government, which is well organised. It makes laws and policies based on economic growth and staying in office. Regulation is many steps behind the business innovation that it funds, and is therefore at the mercy of big business, but it has a relationship here with big business, a two-way relationship. And big business is well organised, It influences government and uses civil society as a planet to make money for a few. And then we've got civil society, which is a ragtag bunch of people led to believe they should not get involved in politics. They're more concerned with looking out for themselves because of the dreams being sold to them by the big businesses and the lie that the government will sort all their problems out for them. This might be pessimistic, but this is by inspiration I've drawn from Laudato Si and Fratelli Tutti to try and construct this image. So we could rephrase the UN's definition of sustainable lifestyles by just changing a few words to unsustainable lifestyles. Because unsustainable lifestyles are themselves clusters of habits and patterns of behaviours embedded in a society, facilitated by institutions, norms and infrastructures. You know, these frame our individual choices in order to maximise convenience and profits for just a few. In Laudato Si, Pope Francis says that isolated individuals can lose their ability and freedom to escape the utilitarian mindset and end up prey to unethical consumerism bereft of social or ecological awareness. So we really face barriers in isolation where we think we can't make a change as individuals, as communities. We begin to feel hopeless. And we can see this in many of the different issues that we see in the world that are really symptoms of a wider crisis: climate change, slavery, hunger, the wasteful culture, the throwaway culture, the lives that don't matter at the expense of what we want to consume, the armed conflict, refugees, mass extinction. All these crises are interrelated, and we too in some way personally contribute to them because of the way that our society operates. So not only do we need to address society if we are to solve our ecological environmental crisis, but at the heart of this it's not easy being green for a very, very, very good reason. Another Venn diagram. So stopping climate change is monumentally more than about reducing carbon. It's about a complete reimagining of the way we see and interact with the world. It's ecological conversion into good ecology. And Pope Francis, again in Fratelli Tutti, looks at the way that we failed to some extent in delivering care during the COVID crisis. And he says, for all our hyperconnectivity, we witnessed a fragmentation that made it more difficult to resolve problems that affect us all. Anyone who thinks that the only lesson to be learned was the need to improve what we're already doing or to refine existing systems and regulations is denying reality. So how do we do this? And we're proposing that it's hard work, but very rewarding and very, very possible. Pope Francis goes on to say that the ecological conversion needed to bring about lasting change is also a community conversion, and that around community actions, relationships develop, are recovered, and a new social fabric emerges. Thus, a community can break out of the indifference induced by consumerism. Now, communities are, places of relationships. They're places of encounter where we share beliefs, dreams, resources, shared interests in the places that we inhabit. We have businesses, we have politicians, we have all sorts of people so communities are an intersection of relationship and resources, in a given geographical place. So our journey to 2030 really is, we envisage a reimagination, rebuilding of our society through asking the question, how can our church institutions and interactions with our wider community facilitate new norms, new infrastructures, and lead to behaviour consistent with our faith and a society that more resembles the kingdom of God? So that we end up something with a better diagram. It was pointed out last night that actually civil society should now be at the top of the diagram, which I will edit for later. But how do we create these ingredients for a sustainable lifestyle? We could say government should be well organised and make laws and policies to ensure human flourishing. Big business provides all work provides dignified work and an equitable share of the earth's resources, and very much focused on well-being and purpose. And civil society should be well-organised coalitions that look out for one another, influence law, and benefit from the business. These shared values and beliefs in the community, such as the dignity of the human person, keep consistency as the business and technology and governments change. An amazingly hopeful book that I would recommend to all of you is this From What Is to What If by Rob Hopkins, who started the Transition Town movement. And he says that if we wait for governments, it'll be too late. If we act as individuals, it'll be too little. But if we act as communities, it might just be enough, and it might just be in time. I love this quote so much. So, over the last was it 4 or 5 years? 4 years. We've been working on this. We've come across, we've seen lots of barriers to these behavioural changes. We've been trying to make some creative interventions to help parishes, to help communities really hit the ground running and address some of these barriers. So this is our hope we want to share with you today is our national project, the Journey to 2030. And really it's about how do we help our church communities be the hubs of transformational change in the world we want to see. To be excited about the future, to dream about the future. What if it did turn out okay? Let's start with that. What if our church wasn't dying? What if this? What do we want to see? How can we get there? And really to offer accompaniment to communities in their journey, to know that they're not alone in their journeys. And also, we've built a website, we've been building a website, it's still very much a work in progress, but to collect lots of resources, lots of stories from around our nation of amazing things communities are doing, and to provide the resources to help communities get involved with things that are already going on, such as we've got this local network map, so you can find, if you're new to this, you want to get involved, where do I find my local network working on these things? There's lots of NJPN member organisations and things represented on this map. Initially, when we launched Journey to 2030, the Sustainable Development Goals were our really main focus. How can the church, with its unique character, how can it work towards this 2030 agenda in a way that only the church could? What was the unique thing we could bring to this agenda? And since then, the Vatican have launched the Laudato Si goals, very much focusing on integral ecology. So how all of these goals, so spirituality, the response to the cry of the poor, sustainable lifestyles, ecological education, ecological economics, a response to the cry of the earth, and community resilience, how are all these things integral to a community's response to our ecological and social crisis? And this is our secret weapon for now that we're launching this weekend, and it will be available on our website in the next few days. But we'll be selling some of these at the back, or haggle or steal them as you see fit. But really, we've turned these goals and lots of the barriers that we've been seeing in parishes and communities into an activity pack, so that parishes can really hit the ground running. They're very much focused on relationship building within communities. So rather than seeing environmental or social work as a complete separate entity to other church mission, how can each member, whether you're the flower arranger, whether you're the life group, how do all of these aspects of an integral ecology, how do they influence, how do they flavour the work that we're doing in every aspect of our daily lives? And later, after the coffee, we will be launching another of our new activities, which is this Let Us Dream activity, which we'll be doing some creative drawing with you all after coffee. Just as an example of projects, what this looks like practically. This is a parish that we've been working with who are inspired by this reality of integral ecology. And this was a dilapidated garden that they had, and the priest, what started off as some apple trees that were donated, there was lots of interest in these apple trees, and since then it's grown and grown, and now there's an allotment garden which is providing flowers for the church. It's we're looking at how the food can provide for the food bank, how even people who don't have the opportunity to grow food themselves can get involved. How the therapeutic nature of these community activities, how they can all be part of this integral vision of solving our ecological and social crisis. Thank you.